Vanguard just did something unexpected. They cut the fees of their largest global ETF, the Vanguard FTSE All World, for a second time within just 12 months. Effective today, its total expense ratio drops from 0.19 to only 0.14% per year. That's a 26% cut, larger than the one they did back in October. Since my wife and I hold a significant six-figure position of Vanguard FTSE All World ETF shares we've accumulated over many years, this cut alone should save us over 200 euros in fees per year based on the current value of our position, which we definitely appreciate. But does a drop like this mean we're switching our investments back to Vanguard? After all, I've been pretty critical of them the last few years. And what does this mean about how the Vanguard FTSE All World stacks up against other global ETFs right now? Let's just say that after crunching the numbers, my answer to both wasn't quite what I expected going in. But first, let's see what Vanguard has done. Less than a year ago, the Vanguard FTSE All World still had a total expense ratio of 0.22%, one of the highest in the industry for global ETFs, which was finally lowered to 0.19% in October, with Vanguard waiting a grand total of 6 years to lower the fees for one of its largest funds in Europe. As a result, almost nobody expected they'd be cutting them again only 9 months later, this time by 5 basis points to 0.14%. To make that more concrete, here's what this latest fee drop is saving investors each year. 5 euros on a 10,000 euro position, 50 euros on a 100,000 euro position, 250 euros on 500k, and 500 euros each year on a million euro position. While that's not life-changing on its own, if you stack both cuts together, we're now paying around 36% less compared to just 1 year ago for one of the largest ETFs in Europe. 2 reductions in a single year are unusual, so let's uncover what might be the reason. Vanguard didn't do this out of nowhere. And if you look at what happened in the European ETF market over the past couple of months, the timing makes a lot more sense. 2 major competitors emerged, both significantly cutting Vanguard's expense ratio while covering the same index. The iShares FTSE All World at 0.12% per year and the Xtrackers FTSE All World at only 0.07%, which I recently covered in another video. Not to mention other competing, attractively priced global ETFs by Invesco, State Street and Amundi that had been attracting more and more funds lately. Vanguard looked quite expensive in comparison. So in my opinion, this fee cut isn't Vanguard trying to be generous, but rather trying to defend its market share, which, to be fair, is exactly what should happen when there's competition. By the way, you can find my favorite low-cost brokers for ETFs in Europe linked down below, which is a great way to support me if you'd like to. So here's where I stand on this. I've been very critical of Vanguard's pricing in Europe for years now, but not because I dislike them. After all, my wife and I have been holding their FTSE All World fund for many years and are not planning to sell any shares before we need to in retirement. But I felt frustrated by how Vanguard had treated its European investors compared to its US clients, where fees are significantly lower across the board to this day. Vanguard's equivalent global fund in the US, tracking an even broader index, only charges 0.06% per year, a fraction of what we've been paying in Europe. According to Bankroll and Wheel's analysis of Vanguard's filings, over the past few years, Vanguard Europe has been funneling a large share of its profits back to the Vanguard Group in the US via service fee expenses as its revenue grew. Which, I'll be honest, sure made it look like our higher fees here in Europe were subsidizing lower fees for US investors. That made me quite upset when I found out, because it goes against what Vanguard is supposed to stand for. So when I say I've been critical, that's why. Not because I think Vanguard is a bad company, I don't. I simply expected better from them specifically, given what they've built their reputation on. Which is exactly why this fee cut matters, and I give Vanguard real credit for it. In my opinion, cutting fees twice in 12 months on their largest European fund is a genuine response to that criticism. Not just from me, but from a lot of European investors, including some of you guys, who have been vocal about this over the past few years. And I believe that's worth acknowledging. It's easy to only point out when a company gets something wrong, but it's just as important to point out when they try to correct it. So, credit where it's due. Vanguard listened, and all investors in this ETF are better off for it. As for how Vanguard now compares to the Invesco equivalent I've been buying for the past 2 years, let's take a closer look. If we only look at the expense ratio, Vanguard now appears a bit cheaper. But if we include the yearly transaction costs, essentially the estimated costs each ETF incurs internally when buying and selling stocks to keep up with changes in the index, which we can find in each fund's key information document, we can see that these are slightly higher in Vanguard's case. After taking this into account, both funds appear to be charging about the same overall. Some of you may also care about the number of stocks each fund holds in order to track the underlying index as closely as possible. which are significantly higher with Vanguard's ETF at around 3,800 compared to around 2,300 with Invesco. Both are using a technique called optimized sampling, where each ETF tries to ensure it holds a representative basket of the index's stocks to replicate it as closely as possible. And while the higher number may look more impressive or preferable, here's what it means in practice. If you download Vanguard's full list of holdings, which I've done, you may realize the following. Position 2,300 to 3,810 only account for 1.16% of the ETF right now, and the last 1,000 stocks only account for 0.39%. So while it may seem like you're way more diversified with one over the other when you just look at the larger number of stocks, this should put things into perspective a bit. Either way, what matters to most investors is likely the net result. How is the ETF tracking the index? So how is it actually performing after all fund fees are accounted for? And overall, Invesco has actually delivered the stronger return over both a 1-year and a 3-year period. Keep in mind that past performance doesn't guarantee future results, and this is not me saying that either of the two is the right choice for you. But the return difference so far has still been quite a bit higher than you'd expect from the small difference in fees the two have had the past few years. So in my opinion, the extra 1,500 holdings may not be doing as much work as the headline number suggests, especially if they only make up around 1% of the index in total. So, am I switching back to Vanguard after the fee cut? I definitely appreciate the cut in fees. On our existing position alone, it's going to save us a meaningful amount each year. Going in, my plan was to wait a couple of months and see how Invesco reacts before deciding anything about our monthly investments. But if I'm being honest, digging into the numbers for this video changed my thinking more than I expected. One reason being that Invesco delivered a stronger return with its FTSE All World ETF over the last 3+ years I looked at, and more than the 0.07% fee advantage that Invesco had for most of that period would suggest on its own. Of course, 3 years is not a long track record, and past performance doesn't tell us much about what happens next. I don't know if Invesco will keep outperforming, and Vanguard's cut definitely matters. But for our monthly investment specifically, in my opinion, a fee difference this small is not enough to outweigh what I've actually seen play out between the two funds so far. So my answer today is a bit more settled than I expected it to be. I'm likely not switching, at least not based on what I know right now. I'm curious to see how Invesco is going to react over the coming months though. Not only to Vanguard, but also to the new competing funds by iShares and Xtrackers, which I barely mentioned today because of how new and small they still are in comparison. So credit given where it's due, but I don't think Vanguard should stop here. Because if you zoom out, this fee cut is really the story of a single fund. There are still many other Vanguard ETFs in Europe that, in my opinion, have plenty of room to get cheaper. Take their S&P 500 for example, priced well above what other fund providers are currently charging in Europe. If other providers are able to push fees that low while remaining profitable, why can't Vanguard? Or as a last, more dramatic example, how is Vanguard, the company that's supposed to stand for value to investors, justifying a total expense ratio of 0.29% for another popular fund of theirs, the Vanguard FTSE All World High Dividend Yield, which they apparently haven't lowered a single time since it launched over 13 years ago. So my hope, and I'm sure a lot of you share this, is that this isn't a one-off. Hopefully, this is the start of Vanguard finally recognizing that European investors expect the same kind of competitive pricing US investors have gotten used to for years. Not only for the FTSE All World, which still has room to go lower even after today's change, but also for all its other ETFs in Europe. Now I'd love to know in the comments, is this fee cut enough to get you to switch back to Vanguard? You can find my favorite low-cost brokers for ETFs in Europe linked down below, which is a great way to support me if you'd like to. Apart from gently tapping the like button and subscribing of course if you haven't yet. As always, nothing I mentioned today was meant as investment advice. I'm just openly sharing my personal opinion based on my own experience as an investor. Thank you guys so much for watching, have a wonderful day, and until next time.